Good afternoon. Welcome to the fourth session of European Entrepreneurship and Innovation Thought Leaders here at Stanford Engineering School. My name is Burton Lee. I'm the course instructor, and today I'll be basically serving as moderator and guide for our discussion. Today we're flipping the coin, the tables a little bit. We're not doing the standard format of two speakers out of Europe. Instead, we're going to look at Europe from the perspective of leading startups and recent startups here in Silicon Valley and what they're doing to enter the European market or expand into the European market. And we're very pleased to have pulled together a really stellar panel of startups and recent startups from the crowdfunding space: Indiegogo, Flipboard, Yelp, and Facebook. And this has come together just in the last 10 days, and we've been extremely fortunate to be able to get all of these speakers here talking on a topic which is of great importance both to Valley startups, to Stanford students who are building startups with a global view in mind, but also of interest to European countries and regions looking to attract American companies, Valley companies, on an ongoing basis. We're very pleased to welcome Miriam Warren, Vice President of New Markets from Yelp. She's on her way, caught in traffic. Angela Zay with International Growth Group at Facebook. Erica Labovitz with Indiegogo. And Christina Mace-Turner, Head of Partnerships at Flipboard. And I forgot to mention that Erica is Director of Strategic Programs at Indiegogo. So we're not going to be able to cover all of the issues surrounding entry or expansion into the European marketplace today. It's a very large topic area which covers many different aspects depending upon which phase your startup is at, and also whether you're a hardware or a software startup. This, however, is a quick attempt, a draft conceptual framework just to try and parse out what is in this broad space of entry and expansion strategies. I've basically broken these up into light, medium, and heavy approaches, with light being applicable mostly to the seed and very early stage software startups, social media, internet, that are looking primarily at issues of user acquisition, buzz building, media outreach, and essentially presence, brand presence in European markets. Medium, getting a bit deeper into customer acquisition, sales and marketing teams, revenue capture, customer support, partnerships at a number of levels. And then on the heavy end, we're not going to get much into heavy end discussions here today, but issues of site selection around manufacturing sites, research and development, product development, data centers, headquarters, et cetera, et cetera. And just to briefly go over some of the questions we expect to touch on today are how to entry and expansion strategies and approaches into Europe dependent upon the particular phase of your company. When do Valley startups start looking at Europe? What are the different ways startups here can engage in Europe? How do you bring new product and service categories to Europe? Indiegogo is quite interesting because they are essentially building a new category in the area of crowdfunding in Europe. And Yelp will also be touching on issues of M&A. How do startups here get involved in acquiring European companies? Christina, thank you for joining us from Flipboard.
Thank you for having me. I'm just assuming I just use the arrows to navigate, right?
Down and up.
I haven't used a non-Mac in a long time.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me. It's great to be here today and talk to you a little bit about Flipboard. We actually have a lot of interesting stuff going on in Europe, so I will try and give you a sort of broad overview of what's happening with us internationally and with Europe in particular. I'm going to touch on three areas. Since we don't have a lot of time, it'll be a little bit superficial, but hopefully you can ask me any questions during the Q&A or afterwards. I'll talk to you about statistics, how many people we have at Flipboard, as well as user acquisition and readership. I'll touch on our international audience and tell you what I think the real levers are for our growth in Europe, which you might be surprised is quite large. And I'll just finish up by telling you the highlights of what I think have really driven our success in Europe. So today, Flipboard is still really small. We're just 76 people, but we come from 20 different countries and really value the international component of our team. We definitely apply that to product innovation, and I think that really shows in the fact that Flipboard is out of the box, so to speak, a natively localizable, if that's a word, app. We've had about 20 million downloads so far, more, and actually the numbers are growing pretty steadily for us. 1.5 million daily active users, 3 billion flips a month, and a flip is basically like a page view. And right now we're clocking more than 1 new user per second, which for us is pretty great. We've been in business for about 2.5 years. So our international audience, Flipboard has users in over 200 countries around the world, and on a monthly basis, 29% of those users are in Europe. And there are 2 key reasons for that, and I think the first one is that the day that Flipboard launched, it was really a global app. We didn't launch a local product, we launched a global product. And that is very much because of the innovation of Apple's App Store, which is where we started. We subsequently rolled out Android, and we're on Google Play and the Amazon App Store. But it's that ability to take a product to market. There isn't a huge amount of cost associated with being in Europe versus the US, and the app stores really do all the work, and in our case, most, if not all, of the marketing in that particular market. We've done a little bit of PR in Europe. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of what's going on for us in Europe is that we've added an additional layer of editorial support to the app. So we have localized content guides in 15 markets, 6 of which are in Europe. Oh wait, you know what? I have a slide for this. There they are. Thank you. So in each of those markets, in addition to the native ability to localize your content in whatever language you care to and make it a local personalized experience, we also have an editorial team that is building out sections that leverage local holidays. You know, it's the Super Bowl. If you were reading Flipboard yesterday, you would have seen a big section on the Super Bowl. So we can do things that are a little bit more tailored and relevant for those markets. So in terms of our success overall, I've touched on the first 2, right? The first is this native internationalization. It's the fact that no matter where you are in the world, you can download Flipboard and easily create a really amazing, relevant local experience for yourself. And the second piece is that this idea of localized editorial, which we have in a number of key markets in Europe, as well as the one thing I didn't talk about, which are key partnerships. So we have some really amazing partners in the US that are core global brands and publishers like Condé Nast and Hearst, partners like that. In addition, in Europe, we work with their counterparts, and each organization is structured slightly differently. So we work with Lagardère instead of Hearst, for example, in France. We work with BBC, The Guardian, The Telegraph, all brands that are really important for markets in Europe. And actually, what's incredibly interesting to me is that you know, we've been growing a tremendous amount of their readership everywhere else in the world. So our partners like that a lot. And then the other key partnership for us is definitely with app store distributors that are doing a lot of work to make Flipboard successful and get it in the hands of their users. So I think I've probably run out of my 5 minutes.
No, you have more.
Do I?
Yeah.
I was trying to keep it down, so I can add to it if anyone.
We're going to take a couple questions after each speaker. Then we're going to go into the panel. Any questions for Christina?
Less of a question, more of an observation. It's very unusual to go straight to internationalization.
I think that's really the benefit of the App Store, is that once you ship your product, you know, with Apple, so we submit our product, the app launches in all of their app stores, and because the app is so easily customized for each user, it has the innate ability to be localized as this native internationalized component.
Where do you expect to, I don't know if you can answer this question. Do you have a general sense of where you hope to be in a year in Europe in terms of?
Yeah, I'd like to see the UK be a lot closer probably to the US market in terms of their share of our user base, because it's a very similar market, and I think that that makes a lot of sense for us from a monetization perspective. I think that the other key markets that we've localized for, it'll be important for us to set up strong partnerships and figure out how to scale our organization with a really small number of people to service our partners in a way that's, really maintains a strong, adequate relationship. I think that's one of the things that distinguishes Flipboard from a lot of other apps in our category, is that we have very tight relationships with our partners, and we work hard to try and meet their needs as well as the needs of users in those markets. So. But that will be, I think 2013 will be about laying the groundwork in Europe for monetization.
And that'll be mostly focused around UK and Western Europe as opposed to
Primarily, I think, but we may come up with some solutions that make it possible. We don't currently do ad targeting, so you're looking at the biggest markets in order to think about who can support global ad sales, but we will probably start in this year, certainly, in the next couple of quarters, to think more about targeting for certain countries in Europe.
Yes, so, gentlemen?
Do you do language translation, and what is your strategy around which countries to do it for?
Well, so all the countries that were on this slide, language is translated, right? So the full app is customized, as opposed to if you were in Bulgaria and you would download content. I mean, because what Flipboard really is at its highest level, it's a browser of social media and RSS feeds. So that means that if you can browse the whole internet, you can plug in any experience you want in Flipboard, and then it renders those feeds like a beautiful magazine. Yes?
One more question, then move on to Angela. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, we've been really fortunate, and at the moment we have more partners than more publishers and content providers who want to be partners than we can accommodate. So a lot of the energy of my team and a couple other teams at Flipboard right now is figuring out, how to automate things and scale. We're still so small, so we don't have a problem generally getting partners. Sometimes there are publishers who have a different sort of philosophy about how they approach the app space and are more isolationist. And so in those cases, it might not be a fit with us because they don't like to see their content disaggregated, but that's a very small minority. People are really, in my experience, people are really looking to extend their reach and be everywhere their existing users are, as well as new audience that they can capture.
Christina, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Angela. I am from Europe originally. I grew up in Germany, but have spent the last 8 years already in the Bay Area. And the last 4 years or so, I've spent spreading Facebook around the world and entering new markets. Facebook's internationalization really started with Europe, both initially when it was still only in English. UK was one of the first international markets. And then when we started the international translations and entered the first non-English markets, that again started with Europe. So since I don't think I have to tell you much about what Facebook is, I just wanted to talk a little bit about about the approach and how Facebook's hacker culture has been instrumental and how that has been relevant for how we went about the internationalization. So if you walk around the Facebook campus, you see a lot of red posters all over the buildings that basically encapsulate some of the cultural pillars of how Facebook operates. This is one of them. What would you do if you weren't afraid? And I think this is a really important question in general. It's an important question for startups. I think at the time in 2008, when Facebook was successful in colleges all over the US and really successful in the English-speaking world, the answer to this question was, to go global, to connect the world. I think that was quite a daunting task at the time, and the complexity of translating Facebook into various languages was a complicated task. It was unclear what would happen, and we started out with French, Spanish, and German. But if you look at the world map of connections a couple years later, it's really clear that that question and going international was the right move for Facebook at the time, with now over 80% of the users outside of the US and Canada, and really all over the world. What was interesting is that the first three languages, Spanish, French, and German, in the Spanish-speaking world and in the French-speaking world, Facebook immediately started to take off, but nothing happened in Germany. So this is when this comes in. Move fast and break things is one of the approaches that really applies to everything we do, from building something quickly, from breaking traditional approaches and processes. And what comes with this is also a similar theme that you can also see all over the offices: fail harder. So the approach is try something quickly, do something quickly, and either succeed or fail and try again and try something else. So at the time when I joined, the question was really, what should we do about Germany? We translated the site and nothing happened. We had a good product, but people were using something else. There was a social network established already, and then some of the approaches are that you can take. You can give up on Germany and go into other markets first where there's no established competitor. Acquisition is an option. An extensive marketing campaign is an option. At the time, we had no marketing budget and really no team either. And what we ended up doing was leveraging our existing user base. If you look at this, it's hard to read. These are all users, some of our first Facebook users in Munich. We went to Munich and Berlin. Mark spoke at some of the universities, and we recruited a first group of Facebook ambassadors. They're wearing T-shirts that say "Warum nicht blau machen," which is
that Mark there?
In the middle, yeah.
In the middle, okay.
So we were trying to leverage our existing user base. We had some users who had international connections, were using Facebook with people abroad, but really not with their friends in Germany, to start entering the market and creating some initial buzz, creating some initial momentum. I spent evenings and mornings on the phone talking to different companies, different organizations, to see who we could partner with, who was interested, curious to try Facebook, to give it a try, both to use it, news organizations, bigger organizations, to use Facebook as a product, but also to help us spread the word and get people to try it. Russia has been another challenging market with strong, multiple established competitors. And as you can see here, there are some signs that we're also making progress in Russia. You can see like buttons in Moscow. And we also had an interesting developer event and a really big gathering of the developer community in the fall, and are starting to make progress there. Another very important theme, I think, is this: done is better than perfect. This has really, for me, as a somewhat perfectionist German, this has been, I think, the hardest one to really embrace. But at some point, next to one of my colleagues' desks, there was an addition to this poster, and he had written, "Because something is better than nothing." And that really resonated with me, and that is really what our translations approach has also been about. The Facebook translation application that is basically allows the community to translate Facebook in their local language has resulted in our ability to maintain and support over 70 languages. And with a product that constantly changes, we push code every day, twice a day now, and make changes all the time. And to keep up with that and keeping that up to date in so many languages, we need that community to support and translate, especially in some of the smaller languages that we don't have in-house support for. But that does lead to sometimes imperfect results. And sometimes you'll find a word or sentences missing, and the community will fix it, usually very quickly. But it allows users all over the world, even if they don't speak English, they don't speak some of the major languages, to navigate the site and to communicate with friends and communicate with people around the world. This is an example of the profile translated in various languages. We've done a lot of work also around names, non-Latin languages, particularly important to allow users to navigate the profile, find people, whatever language they type the names in, etc. So I think I'll leave you with these themes for now, and we can discuss, I think, later on in the discussion, any questions you have specifically about steps in entering different markets and entering different countries.
Ilf.
Yeah, I'm curious if you have had any challenges dealing with the EU Commission in moving into Europe in terms of how they regulate and how they see you dealing with data, privacy, and so on and so forth.
I think initially we were growing the user base, and as we were starting to introduce new products, and with every new product, every change we introduce, the users trying to understand what the product does, the press has comments on it, and obviously there are regulators who we also interact with. We have a big office in Ireland, in Dublin, and we have now an ongoing dialogue and ongoing questions, and for the most part, a very productive dialogue and conversations, but the questions around privacy, around personal data are definitely important, and more important and discussed in some ways in the European context than in some other markets. But we do have a dialogue in many parts around the world, not just in Europe.
We had a question. Yes.
How is Facebook supporting the startups to go into the international market? How do you help them out?
So we have events for startups, for the developer community in various places around the world. We have some of our engineers give talks around how to use the Facebook platform and how to integrate with Facebook and leverage Facebook to grow a startup, for login, for using Facebook identity. So we have had both global outreach, and we have our F8 developer conference here, and we also have local events, smaller and larger conferences in big cities around the world. We've done it in Moscow, as I mentioned, in London, in Berlin, all over the world, really.
Yes, sir.
So your hacker culture is decidedly, at least from my perspective, an American or a Silicon Valley concept. And in our company, we're struggling and trying to bring European decision making tends to be a bit more conservative, very slow to change, very resistant to taking risks. How do you bring that type of culture? How did you inculcate that into your employees to give them kind of the energy to push for change with your clients, I guess, with the advertisers?
I think with employees, if you are part of that, if you're part of that company, if you spend time in the headquarters, and if that's how the company operates, there's a lot of internal communication on Facebook, I think with employees, also we have had landing teams in all the international offices that went from the headquarters and built out the teams there. I think with employees, that's a very strong culture across all the offices I've seen internationally. I think beyond Facebook employees in the community, I think some of these events and talking about how Facebook operates and also how we encourage developers when they use the Facebook platform to iterate and to integrate and continuously iterate and try to improve to optimize the integration. I think that is an approach we communicate, we talk about. And I think it gets adopted to varying degrees. I think when I'm in Berlin and a lot of startups I see in Europe now have a very similar dynamic culture, but some of the larger organizations I have seen and I've experienced in Europe have a slightly different approach and different culture.
We're going to have to go on to Indiegogo now in the interest of time. Angela, thank you very much. So Erica's here from Indiegogo. Thank you very much. Tell us about the crowdfunding scene in Europe and where you're going with that.
Sure. Just to understand a little bit how familiar you guys are with crowdfunding, can I see a show of hands for those that know what crowdfunding is? Okay, keep your hand up if you have contributed to a crowdfunding campaign. Keep your hand up if you have run a crowdfunding campaign. One person. Keep your hand up if you run a crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo. No one. Okay, awesome. I get really excited if there's one person in the audience that has done that, so no worries. So, sorry?
One who's planning, does it count?
Yes, that counts. Okay. Totally counts. Thank you. So I'm going to take a few minutes just to talk a little bit about Indiegogo and what we do, because we are creating an entirely new industry, and then I'm going to use a case study for what we are doing to expand abroad. So just really quickly, crowdfunding. Crowdfunding essentially is the pooling of money from large groups of people for something that you're passionate about. The way we talk about it in the United States is often in exchange for a product, or what we call at Indiegogo a perk. At Indiegogo, our mission is to let anybody fund their passion. Anyone in the world, anytime, for anything they want. These pictures above are just some examples of things that have been funded this past year on Indiegogo. Some of you may be familiar with Hello Hardo. She's a pretty popular YouTube celebrity. The Misfit Shine just won second place at CES. It's a brand new magnetic waterproof activity tracker. I highly suggest you get one. It is awesome. Humans of New York raised over $1 million for Sandy relief this past year. And then many of you may have heard of Karen Klein. She was a bullied bus monitor in Albany, New York, who raised almost $1 million for causes against bullying. So that's what Indiegogo is all about. We're all about allowing people to have access to capital and access to other people in order to make their ideas happen. Essentially evolving the idea of gatekeepers and fundraising. No more big banks, no more institutional investors, no more one person that you need to know, and really leave it to the crowd to help people raise money. Since we started in 2008, there have been over 600 crowdfunding platforms that have started around the world. So a few reasons that Indiegogo is a little bit different from those, and also this will get into our global expansion. There's 4 key things, and these are really the tenets to everything we do, specifically as we expand outside of the United States. So first, we're open. I already talked a little bit about this, but this is our most fundamental core value. Anybody can raise money for anything from anywhere. No gatekeepers. Second, which is something we're really proud of and that you guys will probably appreciate here, we're a very data-driven organization. So we have something called the GoGo factor, which is an algorithm very similar to Google PageRank. And your GoGo factor is driven by how much activity is on your campaign, and that basically decides how high or low you are in our rankings, whether you're on our homepage, whether you're in all of our marketing or PR. Completely algorithmic, all data-driven, absolutely no human intervention in the process. The third thing that we really pride ourselves on is our happiness team. So we have a customer happiness team that ensures that anybody gets responses within 24 hours, 365 days of the year, no matter what language you call in or what country you're from. And then finally, we're completely global. So ever since we launched in 2008, you've been able to create a campaign from anywhere in the world. There's no restrictions on bank accounts or citizenship or your location. So no barriers to entry. So at the end of 2012, we had campaigns in every country in the world. And at this point in time, just to paint the picture, we were only in US dollars. It's okay, go ahead. We were only in US dollars, we were only in English, we are a San Francisco-based company, And we had campaigns created and funded in every country in the world, with the exception of 3 that are restricted because of US OFAC laws. So we did not want to break the law. So based on this, we decided that we wanted to really try to see what it would be like to go into Europe more deliberately and not just have this completely English US platform out there. So what we did is partner with 2 other organizations, Google for Entrepreneurs, which many of you probably have heard of, and then an organization called Stiftung Entrepreneurship. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's in Germany, and it's part of one of their universities, and it's an entrepreneurial organization in Germany, whose purpose is essentially to help entrepreneurs in Berlin get their ideas off the ground. So this partnership really served a few purposes. For Stiftung, they have a competition every year called Gründergarage, and this is something that they do to try to get entrepreneurs in Germany to actively start their new business or product and give them an incentive to do it. They have about 500,000 people that are involved in their program, and this is the 2nd year that they wanted to run this contest. Google for Entrepreneurs is an organization that's part of Google Ventures, based here in Palo Alto. Anyone here with Google? Just, okay. Their whole purpose is to facilitate entrepreneurship around the world. So they're a really small team, 4 or 5 people within the Google campus that partner with other organizations around the world to facilitate entrepreneurship. They wanted to partner with Stiftung to have a contest to award matching dollars to the best entrepreneurs in Germany who partnered with Stiftung. So Google for Entrepreneurs came to Indiegogo and they said, the best way for us to know if these entrepreneurs are really legitimate is if they raise money on crowdfunding and get money and essentially votes from the crowd. But for us to do this, it needs to be in euros and it needs to be in German. This was last June, and our site was in dollars and in English. So because Indiegogo, a little bit like Facebook, likes to fail fast and really likes to be entrepreneurial and try things quickly, we decided that this was actually a great opportunity for us to beta test our European expansion that we were planning on doing this year anyway, and to really facilitate what these other 2 partners were trying to do. So a few key elements to the partnership and why this worked. Each partner had a very specific role. So Stiftung, they had the audience and they had the domain expertise of Germany. Google, they had the brand credibility and they provided matching dollars. So they gave people an incentive to actually use this platform and use this contest to get started. And Indiegogo had the expertise in crowdfunding. We were able to help everybody create campaigns. So basically what we did was a 30-day plan to get people interested in entering this contest, where they had to apply, pitch their business idea, and ultimately, if they were accepted, create an Indiegogo campaign. There were 30 days on Indiegogo to run their campaign, and at the end of the 30 days, the winners, which were decided strictly by the GoGo factor, and whether they met their funding goal, were awarded up to 150,000 euros in matching dollars. For Indiegogo, what we were doing during this period of time, we were beta testing a contest. We had never done a contest with matching funds on our site before. We were beta testing language translation, so we translated our entire site to German. We were beta testing currency. Instead of being only in US dollars, we were offering all the campaigns in euros. And we were beta testing having a language-specific happiness agent that worked off hours from our current team here. So all of this happened in a 4-month period of time. So at the end of the contest, we were very pleased. We had 139 campaigns that had signed up, and they had raised 460,000 euros in funding. Was a huge, huge success for us, but it wasn't without a lot of work and a lot of learning. Very similar to what you heard before. It was a completely different culture in Germany, obviously, and everyone there was very new to crowdfunding. So there were a few key takeaways that we had from the experience that we're using now as we continue to expand abroad. And I'll talk a little bit about our expansion in a second. But some of the key takeaways and some of the things we learned. Language. So when your headquarters team does not speak the language that your website is now translated to, and they're the one doing everything, everything takes a lot longer. You'd think this is very obvious, but it was not obvious to us. And thank goodness for Google Translate, because we basically did everything in Google Translate. So that was one key learning. Things take a lot longer. The other piece with language that was a big learning was the design implications. German is a really long worded language, and we don't have very many designers at Indiegogo. We're a very lean team, and when we translated the site, it just, nothing worked anymore. And we didn't even have a word for crowdfunding in German. No one knows what it is. So like key words, especially in new industries, were really, really difficult. And that took a lot of thinking that we didn't necessarily think we were gonna have to do. And then the other thing is user-generated content. So you touched on this a little bit with Facebook, but most of Indiegogo is user-generated content because it's people creating their own campaigns. But a lot of the static content on Indiegogo is education and how crowdfunding works and our blog and a lot of things that we create. So there's definitely a dynamic of people who create their campaigns in one language and then Indiegogo is in another language. And so learning how that works for people, what happens if they come to a website that's in German, but the campaign is in English because it still has campaigns from all over the world on it, what the bounce rate for that is, how we account for that. Having multiple languages was also something that we still haven't figured out exactly how to crack that nut, but something we learned from that experience. Second, crowdfunding education. So, I should have known, having been with Indiegogo 3 years ago, that people take a long time to understand exactly how crowdfunding works. Maybe if you're in the middle of creating your own campaign now, you can attest that you think you know what you're doing and then you start it and you're like, oh shoot, I don't exactly know what I'm doing. Happens to everybody. And we could have taken a lot longer and spent a lot more time educating our audience on what crowdfunding was before they even applied to the contest and started fundraising on Indiegogo. So right now, for people in the US or using our current platform, 40 days is about the ideal campaign length, but this assumes a certain level of knowledge about crowdfunding and how it works. We really needed to bump that up to more like 50 or 60 days for this entirely new market that was pretty untapped. So that was another key learning for us as we continue to go into new markets. The third thing is really around money. So we do transfer a lot of money. That's what Indiegogo is all about. Money is very sensitive to people. The US and most English-speaking Western countries are very advanced in their comfort with exchanging money online. We were really surprised with how much trepidation there was when we entered the EU. Not only was there a lot of discomfort with some of the payment processors we were using, but there was really a lack of comfort around the transferring of money altogether. Even though we're a payment processing platform and everyone who used us knew that they were going to be transferring money, there was still something about wanting to talk to the person that was going to be getting the money, which isn't really possible. So, there was a lot of education for us around how to make sure people are comfortable with payment processing, how to make sure we're using not only their local currencies, but local processing methods, and really understand where they're coming from. And then the last thing is happiness. So you actually touched on this a little bit with your perfectionism. So we almost intentionally entered a market that we thought was going to be very difficult because entrepreneurship to us, I think, is different than entrepreneurship in any other country, especially Germany, where there is a very high standard for perfection, order, logic. And that's not exactly how our company does things or how Indiegogo and crowdfunding always naturally works. And it required a really high level of dedication for our happiness team because we still maintained that standard of 365 days a year, 24/7 happiness team on call. And now this was for people in another language. And we only had one person on our team that spoke German. So he was very busy for 30 days with a lot of phone calls. And we took him out to lunch a lot when the contest was over. So that was a big learning for us. Like the 365 days still works, but how do we manage the language differences? How do we manage different expectations, different levels of forgiveness depending on where we go? So those were some of the key learnings. Just really quickly, in Q4 last year, we ended up rolling out fully in pounds and euros, English, French, and German, and then pretty much revamping our user experience. So when people came to Indiegogo, they felt like it was more of a global platform. It's still not entirely localized the way we would like it to be. 2013 is going to be a lot of the same, like more contests and more case studies where we're going to continue to test and learn really quickly, probably do a lot of things right and do a lot of things wrong. None of us are experts yet in all of the countries we want to go to, but we are looking for experts if anyone's interested in telling me all about your country of origin. And we're doing this, we're parallel pathing this. So we're doing two things. We're continuing to build out our team from headquarters, which again is in San Francisco. And we're also going to be building out teams in a few small markets, which we haven't announced yet. So trying to do both of those at the same time, I think will help us essentially build this entirely new industry from the ground up, hopefully with a lot of success. Sorry, I think it's a little over my 7 minutes.
So time for one question. Yes, sir.
So did you end up using machine translation to translate your whole website?
We partnered with a translation management system. It was a proxy system, and we have done that again, but we've modified how we've set up the relationship so it's a little more scalable next time. So that was another key learning for us.
Erica, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Why don't you just hold on to that mic? So our fourth speaker has indeed arrived from traffic hell. Miriam Warren, Vice President of New Markets from Yelp. Thank you very much, and welcome to Stanford. Tell us about what Yelp's doing in Europe.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. Next time, Caltrain. Whoops, looks like we're at the end here. We'll just go backwards in time. Super. So I'm from Yelp. We are a website that connects people to great local businesses, and I'm happy to be here to tell you a little bit about what this new markets process has been like for us. We built the site in 2004 and started building a community in 2005 of local reviewers writing about their favorite hair salons and not so favorite restaurants in the San Francisco area. And from there, we sort of went city by city, which is an approach that has informed exactly what we've done now country by country as well. So back in 2006 and 2007, we were beginning to go from San Francisco into places like Seattle and Washington, D.C., San Diego, Chicago, and New York. But a lot of folks said, Yelp will never make it outside of San Francisco because our focus was so wholly on San Francisco and the Bay Area. But what we learned in that, in staying close to home in the beginning, was that we would actually be able to figure out how to make Yelp work really, really well in one place first. And I think if I've learned anything over the last 6 years, it is that we made the right decision with that, at least for what we do. So in 2009, we went to the UK, not unlike most American companies. We also went to Canada, but really sort of hopping the pond was a big piece of what we did. Yelp runs in a community model, which is that we have community managers in more than 100 cities across the world, now in 20 countries. And at the time, we had probably about 50 or so community managers around the US and in Canada. So our first order of business was to hire a few community managers in the UK, led by a sort of senior community manager that we imported from Portland to London. Didn't make the most sense, but she was a very worldly person and continues to be. She is now leading Australia and Singapore for us. And we put her into the UK, and she hired 2 local people. And those local people, along with our person from Portland, started to build what Yelp would become starting in London. In 2010, I moved from the New York office to London. And from there, we decided that we wanted to take over lots of different countries in Europe. We wanted to go there and really be present in all of the places that many of us loved to visit and knew were really important. And so my boss said to me, we should go to France. Awesome. I don't speak French. He didn't have an idea of exactly how we would get there, but I thought, well, having been a recruiter in the past, I'll go to Paris on a train from London, and I'll start talking to people. Amazingly, this crazy idea actually worked. What we found there was a person who was originally American and had lived in Paris for over 10 years and who happened to be a person who had her finger on the pulse of trends there and what was going on. And even though we did not have any presence there, she kind of signed on to this crazy idea that she was going to build a Yelp community in a language that we had never worked in, pretty much by herself, and she should start yesterday. Amazingly, this crazy plan also worked, which is that she is now the person who runs all of our French-speaking countries, which include the French-speaking part of Belgium, France, and also, funny enough, Italy. And so this is how our community really started to grow from people speaking in English, just in San Francisco, to people speaking in English all over the US and Canada, to people speaking French in Canada and also in Belgium and also in France, to building out all over the UK, where we now have people in everywhere from Manchester and Leeds to Glasgow. We're now in Ireland and all of these places. And really, the piece that helped us get there was this community. So for those of you unfamiliar with the Yelp community, these are folks who come out, they write reviews, they take photos, they're checking in on their smartphones, and they are our most active and prolific members. And they are the people who build these communities from scratch with the help of our community managers all over the world. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about sort of a few other things that have sort of helped Yelp along the way. One of them is integration with Apple Maps, which may cause a few laughs in the room, and it is getting better, I will say. I didn't use it on my drive down here, but it is getting better. And I think one of the things that I think actually works really well about Apple Maps is the fact that you can actually see this Yelp content in there. And I think when you look at a company that you might be starting right now, or even one that hasn't even started inside of your head, and you think about what it takes to get from us just being in San Francisco all the way to integration in Apple Maps, regardless of how effective they are right now at this moment, it is a pretty incredible thing, and is something that has actually had a crazy good impact for us in Europe, which is not something that we would have expected. So right around the time when this was launched and became available in a lot of the European countries that we're in, I started getting on my early morning Skype phone calls and other things, people saying, I'm seeing a lot more activity in my city. I think it might be this Apple Maps thing. And that is, in fact, what actually occurred with a lot of these folks from Stockholm to Oslo to Paris, Madrid, and Barcelona. We saw a real uptake that was very palpable for us in Europe that wasn't necessarily the case in the US. Now, that could be for a number of reasons. Could be because we have so much traffic in the US that we're not able to actually pull out something small like that. But in Europe, we really did see that, and it's something that's pretty exciting for us. Burton told me that one of the things you might be interested in is the acquisition that we recently made of our largest competitor in Europe, Quip. And so for those of you familiar with Quip or unfamiliar with it, this is a company that's had a very familiar model, a very similar model to ours, started in Germany and also saw a lot of good traction in other markets in Europe, including the UK. And last year, we purchased Quip, and we are now in the process of integrating our two companies. This is a pretty interesting thing when you have a really big competitor, one that's been on the ground for longer than you have, that you sort of are marching and running with, and often trying to keep up with, and then they become your teammates. So now we're having keg parties and drinks in London and in Germany with these folks that we had a big rivalry, and now we're family. So definitely happy to talk a little bit more about that with any of you who are interested, but certainly a big part of our story, and one that's really developing now as we go along. So it all started with a couple of people in London. It led to hiring one person in Paris. Now we're in 20 countries, most of whom are in Europe, and this is what our group in Europe looks like now. So these are people everywhere from all of the Nordic countries to most of Western Europe, and now even into Poland and Turkey. So I think the real exciting story in this is that that it is possible. So I think for a lot of American companies, they wonder, how can we do this if we don't speak Turkish, we don't speak Swedish or Finnish? What we've really discovered is that the best thing you can do is hire early and often local people who have international experience that either want to work in your headquarters office, that have those language skills and sort of cultural currency that will become important. And those are really going to be the people that help guide you. As much as us Americans really want to be global, I think at the end of the day, we really need a lot of help from people that have grown up in these places and speak their languages, and we need to really listen to them. And I think Yelp has been very effective at that, and that's why we're continuing to see success and be excited about expansion, not just in Europe, but all over the world. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh.
One or two questions?
Sure.
One or two questions? Sorry, yes.
So a question about Quite. We've seen that in Europe there's a business model emerging of copying your US startups and waiting for the Silicon Valley startups to buy them.
That's true.
Sometimes this works. We've seen Groupon, we've seen eBay. Sometimes it doesn't work. We've seen Facebook crushing the local competitor. You're sort of a hybrid case.
Yep.
What was the thought process behind doing that? And in retrospect, would you buy Quite directly if you were expanding today?
Well, we only bought it a few months ago, so we probably would if we were making that decision today. I guess the question could be, would we have bought it earlier? And
Yeah, that's what I meant. When you first entered.
I don't think so. I mean, I think one of the things you have to do, and one of the biggest learning lessons for us, was to compete against them. So to have our community managers, to have any other employees that are out there in the market constantly hearing about another company, which is really what led to our successes early on here. When I first started at the company 6 years ago, all I heard about was City Search. City Search, City Search, City Search. I don't know how many of you are using City Search these days. But the same thing was true for Quite, and I think they actually probably made us a much better company over the last few years, because we did fight against them, because we had a formidable competitor that was really trying to outdo us at every turn. And I frankly think that one of the things I've heard in Europe that continues to be true is that Europeans are very successful in these startups because at a very early stage in the company's life, they are forced to be already multinational. And I think that's not something that the US has to do, because we have such a big country to conquer here that we kind of don't understand how to do that. And by the time we get to a place in our company's life cycle that we're ready to expand, so you can see for us starting in 2004, but no expansion until 2009, and no expansion outside of English till 2010. You know, if we were a company that had started in France, we would have had to expand multilingually probably within the first year. And I think that's the big piece. And I think Quite had a lot of initial success because of being forced to do that early on.
Okay, is this short? Good, okay.
Miriam, could you please tell us, since your next expansion market looks like to be Europe, Western Europe, and you mentioned Germany in particular, like what would be your next market after Germany? Would it be Eastern Europe? It would be Asia? Where are you looking at?
Well, we actually expanded to Germany in 2010. So our most recent expansions have been in Poland and Turkey. And before that in Singapore. So those are our three most recent expansions. And really, our party line these days is that we'd like to be everywhere in the world. We are considering every country in the world, and it's really just a question of how much myself and my colleagues in the new markets department, which is currently 2, can do that. I've gotten a lot of requests for Russia, so bring it on. We are definitely interested. Yeah.
Thank you, Miriam. Keep your mic on. So I'm going to ask our panelists to please move up to the hot seats. Christina and Angela, if you could sit together, because you're going to be sharing this mic, okay? And Erica and Miriam, I guess, Erica, you're going to need to come around here. And yeah, there you go. But before we go into the panel, I need to do just a really quick run through of the offerings of our European government partners. And this is going to be very quick. Estonia, Northern Ireland, and Sweden. Andres, where's Andres? Andres Virg of Enterprise Estonia, Silicon Valley, And is Brian Glynn here? Yes, of Invest Northern Ireland. So I invite you to speak with both of them afterwards regarding particularly what Northern Ireland and Estonia can offer. These slides are going to be on our website. We don't have enough time to go through this in detail, but Estonia is definitely looking to attract startups out of Silicon Valley across all these areas of user acquisition, localization, et cetera, et cetera. These slides give some sense of the type of infrastructure and support you can get in Estonia, and also how the Skype heritage of Estonia has really created a very vibrant and strong entrepreneurial ecosystem there, which is very supportive of startups coming out of the valley. So please go talk to Andres Virg for further information about Estonia. Northern Ireland, also a very well-educated population. Very strong track record of attracting Valley companies. My sense, Brian, is that most of the Valley companies have been more mature manufacturing-oriented companies up to date, but that's changing a bit. You've also got a strong software base in Northern Ireland as well. Seagate is one of the more prominent Valley companies that's located manufacturing facilities. But there are a number of many top tech companies out of the Valley elsewhere in Europe and the US who are currently operating in Northern Ireland as well. And finally, Vinnova, so Sweden. We don't have our official Swedish rep here today, Anne, but I did want to point out that on 2011, Facebook located their major data center in Europe in northern Sweden. So this was a very significant win for Sweden, which has really put them on the map and is part of, so if you recall the very right far part of the spectrum I showed of heavy levels of expansion entry into Europe. So data center facilities are part of that very heavy site selection criterion process, which is very different from some of the early user acquisition topics and themes we've touched on today. Okay, now we're going to go into the panel, and basically we're just going to open this up for Q&A. Who wants to go first? Don't be bashful. This is rare. Okay, yes?
Yeah, I was just curious about Yelp. When you saw the picture up there, it looked like it was about 80% women in the company. So is that because of the company and what you do, or is you finding that, that women...
We're taking over the world. I think that must be, I mean, look right here. I'm in good company. So the majority of folks that you saw in that picture represent our marketing arm. So while we do have a sales office in London, the majority of people who work for us in Europe and everywhere outside of the US are in the marketing arm. So they are community managers or folks who manage community managers. And community managers are folks that they can be, obviously we have both men and women, but it is slightly weighted towards women. Not really sure why that is, but they're very good at doing it, and they've been spreading the word all over the world. So that could be one piece of it. I suppose if you had kind of the whole company, you would see more of a 50-50 ratio.
Two elements of it that I think will be really beneficial. One is partnering with a credible brand name, especially going into a new market as an unknown brand as well as an unknown industry, which many people think our industry is illegal or question whether it is legal. Like that element of it, which I can talk about if anyone's interested, but that element of it makes it really important to have some type of brand credibility, either through a partnership or sponsorship or investors or whatever it is. And then the partnership element that brought in the audience. So it was a lot of marketing, built-in marketing for us. We didn't do any marketing in Europe at all. The Stiff Tongue group did that. And that was, I mean, we were essentially able to not hire our community managers internally. So I would replicate the model. I would not necessarily replicate beta testing the entire localization of the product in conjunction with a major partnership. This one happened to work for various reasons, but there are a lot of risks associated with that depending on your appetite for high stress situations, you may or may not want to do.
Question back here. Yes.
My question is to Miriam, and also I would like to hear your opinion about
model mainly comes from advertising from local businesses. My question is, when you go to a new country, you said now you have a sales team in London. For example, if you are in France, how do you get the local merchants to advertise with you? So currently, correct me if I'm wrong, the merchants that are in Yelp in France do not pay to be there. Only the ones that have the advertising part. So how do you do that? Do you do it by yourself, or you partner with the in that market?
Historically, we've been doing it by ourselves. So we currently monetize in just a few places. So the US, Canada, the UK, and Ireland. Obviously, we want to monetize in every place that we're in, but typically the content cycle takes a while. So we don't enter a market. So for example, we entered in Poland a few months ago. We wouldn't then turn around and sell immediately because we need the content, the community, all of those things to be happening. Right now, we sell in all of these markets in the same way that we do in the US, which is that we have a local telesales team that calls into these local businesses and speaks to them and explains to them that their reviews are on Yelp. This is obviously something that takes a lot of guts and a lot of courage and a lot of time to do. And of course, the acquisition of Quip will help us with the language skills and that sort of thing to begin to monetize in the other countries that we've expanded into. But typically what you see is our monetizing several years out from launch, and typically it's happening in the same order that we launch. So we went to the UK and Ireland first, which is where we're monetizing now, and next came France, Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands in 2010. So if you want to take a look at generally where we might be thinking about going in terms of monetization, that would probably be next on the list.
Yeah, I think the same applies for Facebook. We went in first, built up a user base, hired local growth managers, and focused on growing the user base in the local ecosystem. And then months or a year or 2 years later, we started building out a local sales team. And we now have sales offices and teams in the major European cities and in other parts, in other places around the world.
I have a question for Angela. As you know, when Facebook came to Russia, you realized that there has been already a competitor. That idea was clearly taken from Facebook, the color, design, everything. So the question is, did you pursue any legal action? Did you try to legally dispute it? And if yes, how it finished, if I can ask? And if no, why? Why not? Thank you.
The question was whether we did take any legal action in Russia, where there is a very similarly looking competitor. No, we have focused on trying to see how we can create awareness for Facebook and spread Facebook, and we have emphasized the global community, but also the locally relevant content, and we have a lot of local influencers, local celebrities using Facebook in Russia who create interesting local content. And we have basically focused on building out a local community and on continuing to innovate and basically launch new features. We have done that in all markets. We have not really pursued, yeah.
I have a question for Christina. So it seems that language has been kind of a common theme, or lack of language skills or lack of cultural skills among Americans here in the Bay Area. How much has that been a challenge for Flipboard with your particular strategy around Europeanization, internationalization?
Honestly, most people working in Europe speak English. So, I'm sorry. So most people in Europe who you do business with are used to having to speak in English because they have to speak to one another, even if they're not talking to Americans. But certainly there is a degree in terms of partnerships of, as we start to look beyond the UK and even beyond countries like Germany, but to countries that perhaps English is a less common occurrence. When we roll out into those markets, then we'll staff to match that need. Right now, it isn't really very much of an issue for us.
What percentage of your employees are non-Americans, if you
Well,
approximately?
so
do you know
of 76 employees, you
Yeah.
know, they come from 20 different countries, and
Okay.
most of them speak more than one language. So it's a pretty international team. I mean, we're local in terms of being in Palo Alto and New York, but we're very much international in terms of how we think about things and how we think about scaling the business, because we have an audience around the world. So the idea is, you know, we're still early phase of figuring out how to meet their needs.
Okay. Let's see. Yes, sir.
So question to all of you basically on monetization again, but from, maybe you can share with us statistics. I mean, from an ROI perspective and from a behavioral perspective, Europe versus the US, we heard from Erica, of course, how are they willing to invest or not, but from your perspective, advertisement and everything, how much time does it take you to recoup the investment in just going into Europe? And, you know, statistically, is Europe more profitable than US?
Are you asking me?
Go for it.
All right, I'll take a shot at this. So for us, because we're such a small team, you know, for us, it's really important to prove our ad model and feel that we've made the right choices to make advertisers and our partners that have brands successful. So we have started to monetize some content in Europe, specifically in the UK. So the Telegraph and the Guardian and a number of other publishers will start selling ads soon. But the issue for us is that we're actually in the process of building an ad server, which is a big undertaking along with everything else our team is doing. And so we'll start, I think that when we start targeting advertising, we will have a lot more partners that we allow to monetize. They all want to, but in Europe, at least in my experience, it needs to be local, at least by country. I mean, but in the US, a lot of advertisers are willing to have global exposure with their ads and not have to target. So that's the limiting factor for us right now.
Yeah, I don't have much details on specific countries, but Europe as a region is definitely very important for us and was important to build out and support locally by market. But as a region, Western Europe is a very important region for monetization.
I think for us, basically Europe continues to be sort of in this new markets bucket. It is a cost center. So to really recoup that money will take some time, but we're seeing encouraging signs, of course, in the UK and Ireland. But I think anyone who's wanting to get into Europe, it's for the long haul.
So if Europe is a cost center,
What's the break-even period then for the best markets in Europe? I mean, just asking anybody, is it a couple of years? So is it 3 years, 6 months? Obviously, this varies a lot from east to west, north to south. Any sense here?
I think it depends a lot on the nature of the product and how much it's platform-based versus just like thanks. I think it depends a lot on the nature of the product, how much it's platform-based versus transactional. Indiegogo is very similar. Right now, our expansion's a cost center, but it's also, allowing us to amplify the platform that we have here, and is essentially likely generating more revenue here, despite the fact that we're spending money there because of the nature of the social exchange. I'd imagine there are many other examples like that. I don't know specifically, but I think it does depend a lot on the product itself.
All you guys raised a lot of money. Did you raise any rounds specifically for international expansion? And if so, did you choose investors that would add any value in foreign markets? And if not, or if yes, did they help you in any specific way?
Please. We didn't raise any rounds specifically for European expansion, although we have talked about it. Many of our investors have European portfolio companies that we are able to lever either
our peers there to talk to ask questions, or they just put us in touch with people. So we are able to use those relationships, but that's a very nice byproduct. It wasn't the intentional element.
I would say the same. Like, we do have some international investors who we've had conversations with at times, but I think what has been important is building out a team that focused on international markets, both here in the headquarters, and we have the first thing in any of those markets I mentioned was hiring a local growth manager in the market to build the local community, local partnerships, and also bring information and input and feedback back into headquarters.
So we started about 5 minutes.
It's late. Stanford students, if you need to go now, you can go, but we're going to go for another 5 or so minutes here, 5 to 7 minutes. Next question. Yes, sir. And then you're next, okay? Yes.
It's actually a question to each of you. If you have to do it again, what's the key learning that you would do different? Would share with me?
I think I'd probably say I'd put in even more resources than we did, and I'd put them in earlier. So I think one of the things that successful American companies suffer from abroad, and I've talked to many of my compatriots in similar internet companies, is that we try to use our same model in exactly the same way. So what we're experiencing now is that our model is actually working, but that it didn't work quite as fast when applied in exactly the same manner. So what we're doing is sort of a model that's a little bit turned on its head. So what happened for us is that, and it's a natural reaction, is that we, several years into our life cycle, we expanded to the UK. And so what we tried to do is what we were doing at that time. So a company of 3 years in the UK. What we forgot, and that we're just continually relearning, is that you actually have to start from the beginning, or maybe even something before what the beginning looked like for you. So we tried to start from where New York was in 2009 or 2010, which isn't where the UK was at that same time. And so then we had to try to think about what were we doing in 2005, but even then it was sort of a different situation, right? And so kind of trying to think about something that came even before, it's almost as if you're looking at a prequel. And I think if I were to do it again, I would try to have that in mind, and then put in even more resources than we thought we needed.
So Miriam, are you suggesting
that startups thinking of expanding to Europe should have a company historian as one of their early hires?
Definitely, someone that reminds us that we were sharing muffins and sharing hotel rooms, and we were, 5 people in a shitty office. In the beginning, we were not. You don't go from that and then forget all of that time in between and then think you're going to start in the beginning again. But I will say, to our credit, we did open a pretty shitty office with mice that ate my cookies on my desk in London, and that's where we started it from, which is very different from where people who are working in Yelp in London now in a very posh office in Marylebone. So,
did anyone else want to?
I would just add that our choice was to start as a mobile application and not a web application, and that has made all the difference in us being a global product versus a local one that will require a lot more resources to spin out into other countries. So that strategy has worked really, really well for us, and to date it's cost us like almost nothing. It's just a byproduct of the nature of our product combined with this amazing distribution from app stores, which that model didn't really exist before. So if I were going to recommend a starting place, from my perspective, that's where it would be.
Yeah, I would also say definitely not later. If anything, I would have looked into internationalizing earlier. I think as soon as there is a good product market fit, and as soon as the product works in a region, I think it's very valuable to see if and where else it can take off quickly with a limited amount of resources.
Any?
I would echo what Miriam said. Sorry. I would echo what Miriam said, and we actually are facing the exact opposite challenge. We don't have the most mobile optimized platform right now, and we really need to make sure that happens before we expand beyond Europe specifically. So I would agree with that.
Yes, sir.
Org structure question. Who did you report to? And who is part of your team? It's only marketing or is it also sales, monetization, and product?
Do you want us to just go down? I reported to our CEO until about 2 weeks ago. I now report to like an interim chief revenue officer, and my team is mostly business development, but I dotted line sort of manage someone in each function that helps us build out our international programs. But we do have a very specific international product manager on the product engineering side. That is essentially my counterpart.
I report to the COO, and in my organization, I have community managers, people who manage community managers that sit sort of all over the world. And then I also manage the creative team, which includes folks who do design specifically related to marketing, and then also our weekly Yelp, which goes out to 11 million subscribers across and is in local language, sort of across the platform.
Facebook created a growth team fairly early on, and international growth has been part of the growth team and focused on user acquisition. And then as we got traction in the market and established a significant user base, the sales team and monetization sits in a different org and went in after growth.
I report to the CEO, and my team is responsible for initiating partnerships with content partners. I have people on my team who launch partners, run partner programs, and manage day-to-day sustaining relationships with them.
Mark.
For Erica and Angela, you both mentioned partnering with universities, at least informally at the very beginning as you moved in. Could you talk more about university partnership strategy, and are you still using that, or would you use that more in the future and so forth? Was that a good strategy or not?
So for us, I mentioned the ambassador program. I think in the very early beginning, students and universities are a great place to get some initial feedback and initial traction for especially something like a social network. So in the beginning, that I think was very interesting and that was valuable. Over time, with scale, product levers and other levers became more important.
For us, it's the same. The university environment is great to catalyze discussion around anything new, but then in addition to that, for Indiegogo, most university students need money for something. So, it's a joke, but it's actually true. Like, whether it's actually paying for school or, most of the people sitting here are probably thinking about some type of business venture that you're gonna go do, it's a really good place to market test for us. And we have quite a few university ambassadors as well, and it's really just, we're going to continue to do that both in the US and abroad.
We have time for 2 more questions. You, sir?
It's kind of a follow-on to the question from the org chart. The west coast of the United States is not the easiest place to do business from to Europe, given the 9-hour time difference. We have an office over there, and I guess my question is, how do you best stay in touch with your teams at the 9-hour difference? I mean, even East Coast New York City would make a tremendous difference in our lives, wouldn't it? But it's not here. Where do you invest to be able to manage your teams that are over there? Is it in telecommunications? Do you do video conferencing? Or is FaceTime critical to you guys? Like, where have you gotten the most value? Being in front of them physically, or is it a balance?
Most of my team sits in New York, so I manage them from here. I'll probably do a hire, maybe one, in Europe next year. But I think video conferencing is really important. I think FaceTime is really critical with partners, so it's a little different. How much internal time I think, you spend really, it plays out there. So, But yeah, going to Europe from California is really hard.
I think internally with the team, a lot of morning video calls. And in general, I think I've spent a lot of time traveling, especially in the early stages of entering a market. I spent a week, 2 weeks at a time talking to a lot of people, trying to find the right person to hire locally. And then over time, as the local managers ramp up, I've spent less and less time there in person, but have the whole team come to the headquarters together to also exchange best practices from different regions and spend time face to face and be part of the headquarters as well.
So for you, would they come to Dublin?
They come here.
Here?
Yep.
What is here? Not we have an office in Dublin as well.
We've also met in a few times in other places, but coming to the headquarters, I think, is also important for employees who spend a lot of time in by themselves in small teams in the markets.
So I do a lot of early morning video calls. I also manage people on the other side, so in Asia and in Australia. So I do very early, starting around 7 from here, and then I go to the office, and then I may do the Australia, Singapore on the back end of the day. So I haven't figured out how to eliminate the middle part. It tends to be a little long. One thing that I noticed pretty early on, especially with the newest markets in Europe, which would be the Nordics, Poland, and Turkey, is that I tried to do what I did before, which would be like a 1 hour one-on-one once a week. And I realized that actually what worked better was lighter touch more often. So we now have a new markets call on Skype at 7:30 on Monday mornings. Then my team, along with my chief of staff who sits in London, have something called a Kaffeeklatsch. He's German, so he likes that. And so they kind of get together on Skype when I'm asleep. And then I also talk to them, at least in the beginning of when they start, like, it could be 3 or 4 times a week, just very short. And then I travel a ton, so I go to them. I'm going to go to them next week, to several of them. And then also they come to us, so they come to our headquarters. And then we also do things, for example, several months ago in London, the picture that you saw of the team, they were all getting together for what we call a sort of regional community where they get together and they learn PR and they learn about each other and that sort of thing. So I think it really is a combination of both. You have to have that in-person time, but I also think that when you're talking to them, if your connection can hold, definitely seeing them talk to you is really, really important, even if they have to see you in your pajamas at 7 in the morning, which they often do with me.
We have time for one more question.
So I have a question about the legal aspect, for example, especially with Indiegogo, when you go exporting crowdfunding in countries in Europe, does it pose legal questions, and how do you deal with those aspects?
It does pose legal questions. So there's basically 2 rules of thumb. We don't go anywhere without confirming that we won't go to jail, or that we won't go to jail. So it's basically like a spectrum of legality that we view everything with, including when we entered in the United States. 100% legal versus you're absolutely going to go to jail, and then almost everything is somewhere in the middle, especially in Europe. Right now, like, most of the law is undefined. So we just confirmed that we will not go to jail and that no one uses our platform will go to jail. And we have legal counsel here that has European counterparts. The other thing we do is actually, I guess we do 3 things. The second thing we do is confirm that our terms of service that we have here applies in whatever that country is, because that essentially is what regulates the legality of a lot of things. That's pretty easy, just takes a few hours. And then the third thing we do is ensure that we have legal counsel on call if one of our users, either a campaign owner or contributor or someone else, threatens any type of legal action. So we don't have lawyers on retainer in every country. We have one European law firm that we use that, should we get someone to call from Turkey or Italy, we call them, they find the right person, and they help us. It's happened every single time. So it's definitely something that we have very top of mind. But that approach has worked well for us so far.
Any other comments from the panel before we wrap up? I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming to Stanford on relatively short notice. It's been a great pleasure to have Indiegogo, Yelp, Facebook, Flipboard here. We're going to do networking, so if you want to meet the speakers, please come on down and let's all thank them.